Have you ever seen a summoning salts video? Probably. You clicked on a video about BTD6. You're either younger than 10 or a massive nerd. Or both. Either way, recently Summoning Salts uploaded this video. In it, he detailed the leaderboards for Mario Kart DS, and it got me thinking, why doesn't the BTD6 community have a scoring system like this? Well, I thought about this quite a bit and figured the answer is actually pretty simple. In Mario Kart, the timer is used as the score. It's built into the Mario Kart games and is a great approximation at the skill level of a race. If you drive slowly, your time will go up. If you drive quickly, your time will go down. The timer serves to effortlessly rank the performances of each gamer that chooses to play Mario Kart. In BTD6, it's not so easy. We don't have any built-in scoring system that helps us track difficulty across different games of BTD6. What's worse is that BTD6 contains very complex systems that interact with each other in a variety of ways. The balloon types, tower synergies, tower placement, monkey knowledge, damage calculations, ability timing optimization, paragon optimization, map layout, map gimmicks, farming strategies, round knowledge, popologies. On top of all of those, having a knowledge of how each tower does on every round. Oh, and not to mention that all of these things change drastically based on which of the 14 game modes you are playing. While this is great for making the game fun, it makes formalizing the score for the game slightly more difficult. Even small changes in the rule set can result in very different gameplay styles. Games of BTD6 don't come wrapped with a nice score and a ribbon on top of it. I want to change that. So, I like doing and watching difficult BTD6 challenges, and I know a lot of other people do too. But currently, I don't know if the community has a way of ranking the difficulty of a challenge once it's been completed. There are ranked leaderboards for things like boss events, races, and contested territory, but as of yet, Ninja Kiwi has not created a ranking system for single player. That's what I want to do today. I want to create a BTD6 equivalent of the Mario Kart timer. A way for the community to more objectively rate the difficulty of a game and assign it a score. This would allow us to create a leaderboard of impressive runs for different maps. We could also see pretty objectively who the best players are at each map, or even at the entire game of BTD6. So that's what I want to do today. We're going to create a function called gems that approximates how difficult a challenge is in BTD6. So, let's start with a very simple function. One that comes to mind for me is just making your score the round you get to. If you beat round 5, your score is 5. If you beat round 100, your score is 100. It's very intuitive, but this method has issues. It has some problems. The first problem is that it ignores key aspects of the game, like map difficulty or game mode. Using this method, we would say that an easy game of logs that gets to round 100 should be scored the same as a Blackboard or Chimps game on Ravine. They would both receive a score of 100, but we know as BTD6 players that one is much more difficult than the other. In addition to that problem, we also run into more trouble with free play rounds. If you didn't know, free play rounds occur after round 140. In contrast to the exact and precise rounds that come before it, rounds after 140 don't have an exact structure, but are rather algorithmically generated. This introduces a factor of randomization that could leave our function with a large amount of variance. On top of this, late game runs can take hours. Getting all the way up to those high rounds only to have a roll of the dice for a higher score is not exactly fun. At least not for most people. high rounders are kind of crazy. So in my opinion, it's best to leave rounds out of the discussion, even if they're a very tempting metric to use. Another bad thing rounds do is it opens up avenues for ties. Sometimes a specific round can be insurmountable due to a challenge, and basically if anyone can get up to that round, they'll get the high score. So we don't exactly want that. Another contender might be time. Speedrunning BTD6 isn't unheard of, and races are almost completely dedicated to speedrunning. But adding time to your function has some problems. It's not a great option for single player in particular. If you leave the auto start option on and fast forward through everything, you basically reach the speed limit of a certain challenge very quickly. BTD6 is also often about taking your time to create effective strategies. It's not a game where breakneck speeds, but rather slow deliberations can often make a huge difference in quality of play. On top of all this, using time as a scoring method heavily punishes stalling strategies, which are very important in a lot of games and are a fun part of BTD6. It's not that I think these are useless metrics for scoring this game, I just think they leave a lot to be desired. So, if we want to create a proper scoring system for this game, the first thing we should ask ourselves is, what makes a game of single-player BTD6 difficult? Or, put in a different way, what metrics can we use to measure the difficulty of a game? Well, there are a lot of different dimensions we could measure, but the scoring system I invented only uses 3. I selected these 3 because I think they're some of the most important metrics we can use to determine how difficult a game of BTD6 is, therefore letting us know the amount of skill needed to beat that difficult game. The 3 metrics that are used are G, this is your game mode score, E, which represents your end of game cache score, and M, which stands for map difficulty score. GEM score. This is what leads to the name of GEMS. It's your game mode, end of game cache, map difficulty score, or GEMS. GEMS takes a game as a variable and computes a score from it. We'll represent the entire game that is played as X. Our goal is to develop the function GEMS of X, so that it accurately ranks the difficulty of a given game. So, let's start with the simplest of the 3 parameters, M. M represents the point you get based on the map's difficulty. I'm going to give a rather basic piecewise function to describe M, but it can and probably should be expanded upon by the community. So here it is. If you're not familiar with math stuff, that's fine. This is basically saying that you get a higher score for harder maps. So if you were playing a game on the map Logs, your map score would be 1. And if you were playing a game on the map Flooded Valley, your map score would be 10. Playing on the map Chutes would give you a map score of 3, since it's an intermediate map. Playing on the map Geared would give you a map score of 6, since it's an advanced map. Basically, the harder the map, the higher your score for this category. Pretty straightforward, I hope. I think ideally these M values would be decided by the community for each map individually. This is because most high-level players know that not all maps are created equally, and certainly not put in the correct difficulty slot. For example, playing a game on X Factor and Cornfield are treated as the same difficulty with this function, when in reality, if Logs was a 1 difficulty and Bloody Puddles was a 10 difficulty, then X Factor would probably be about an 8 and Cornfield would be about a 4. But for simplicity's sake in the video, this is what we're going with right now. One final point about M. Since each map would have its own leaderboards, like with Mario Kart tracks, you may be thinking, why do we even need M if all the leaderboards are going to be independent? Well, M actually serves as more of a standardization term. If we didn't have M, then easy maps would get much higher scores than expert maps. So putting M into the equation helps to give higher score for harder maps, reflecting their difficulty. Also, American Sluggers. It's a free solar punk sci-fi novel that I'm writing, and it's on my channel right now. You have literally nothing to lose by checking it out. I narrate the whole thing as an audiobook, so you can just press play and listen while you're playing a game of BTD6. I also worked pretty hard to make sure that the series has a very distinct visual style with hand-drawn character models, a fun solar punk setting, and a lot of unique technologies and ideas. I put a lot of care into each episode that I release, so it would mean a lot to me if you gave it a shot. If you want to check it out, click the icon on the top of the screen or search American Sluggers on YouTube. Now, let's look at this function again. The next factor I want to discuss is G. Recall the variables we want to define. G is the game mode score. E is the end of game cache score, which we'll get to soon, and M is the map difficulty score, which increases based on how difficult your map is. G is the game mode score, and it's similar to the map difficulty score, with a little more added onto it. We want our function to encode the following. The harder the game mode, the higher your score should be. There are generally two things that we should think about when it comes to how difficult a game mode is. The first is what I call the base difficulty. Easy, medium, hard, and impoppable. I want to point out that impoppable is technically not a base difficulty. For some reason, seriously, Ninja Kiwi, why? It's so clearly supposed to be a base difficulty and not a game mode. It follows the trends of easy, medium, and hard, and its own metal spot is in the UI. And it even used to be its own base difficulty in BTD5. A petition to make impoppable its own base difficulty coming soon. But anyways, back to the function. If our goal is to create a function that approximates the difficulty of a challenge with a score, then it would make sense that impoppable games give you a higher score than easy games. And indeed, this is the case with the on-screen formula. I've taken the same general formula as before with map difficulty and just put in base difficulty instead. This function tells us that you get 1 point for beating a game on easy mode, 3 points for medium, 6 points for hard, and 10 points for beating a game on impoppable. The harder the base difficulty, the more points you get. Pretty straightforward once again. But wait, there's more. The second thing we need to consider when calculating G is what I call the game mode add-ons. These are all the other game modes that aren't as fundamental as easy, medium, hard, and impoppable. These add-ons will get a separate score. However, these game modes aren't treated the same as the base difficulty. You can actually play a game with multiple add-ons at the same time. To reflect flexibility with this scoring system, I wanted to consider multiple add-on game modes as well. Examples would be half-cash chimps or doing alternate balloon rounds with military monkeys only. These are like combination game modes that you see. Introducing multiple game modes also adds another issue. Doing 2 game modes at once can be significantly harder than doing 1 game mode at a time. So we don't want to just add them together. Instead, we'll assign each of the game modes a multiplier. Here's the list of the multipliers that I created. So let's say you're playing with double HP Moabs. You'd get a
1.7x
multiplier on top of your base difficulty. If you're using military-only towers, you get
1.1x
multiplier on top of your base difficulty. If you're doing chimps, you get a 2x on top of your base difficulty. Putting this into more mathy terms, our final game mode score, G, would be the following. It's your base difficulty times all of your add-on multipliers. Again, the advantage of separating the base difficulty and add-ons is flexibility. We can describe a lot more game modes than what Ninja Kiwi actually allows the user to do in single player. This opens the door for people doing different game modes in the challenge editor. For example, if you want to play an easy mode chimps or an impoppable game with only military monkeys, we could easily describe those weird game modes with the function. Another benefit to breaking these up is that the add-ons can encompass a lot of things. You could potentially have an add-on for a normal boss or elite boss. You could give points for completing a 2TC. You could do a multiplier for completing a 2 megapops or an all pops run. As long as people can agree on the point values for doing these things, we can multiply them to the add-on scores and score those games as well. Once again, these point values would probably be better decided by the community rather than me just throwing them out there, but for now, my approximations will have to do. Let's put base difficulty and the add-ons together by calculating some game mode scores. Let's say a player was on medium difficulty and playing half cash. So medium difficulty is 3 points, that's 3 base points, and half cash is a 2.2x multiplier. So G would end up being 3 times 2.2, which is 6.6. This would be approximately the same difficulty as if someone was playing a hard game with support monkeys only. The hard base difficulty is 6 points, and support monkeys only would be a 1.05 multiplier, which is 6.3. So the two are generally comparable, 6.6 versus 6.3. A player doing a black border chimps run, which is a 2.5x multiplier on a hard base difficulty, 6 points, would be approximately the same difficulty as doing a regular chimps run, which is a 2x multiplier, on the impoppable base difficulty, which is 10 base points. So you can see that the two are about close. I mean, 18 and 20, they're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. As an added bonus, we can also encode multiple game add-ons in this scoring system. Imagine playing a game of half-cash chimps on a hard base difficulty. The base score would be 6, the multiplier would be 2.2 for half-cash and 2 for chimps, so 6 times 4.4 would be 26.4. Okay, now that we have G and M, the only thing left to look at is E, and recall E is our end-of-game cash score. E represents the amount of cash the player has once the game mode ends. This is useful to keep track of differences within the same challenge. For example, if two players black border quad chimps, how do we know which run was more impressive or difficult? Well, one easy way to tell is looking at their end of game cash. This equation looks rather random, right? I promise it's not. Let's break this equation down and explain why the parts of this equation were used. Let's start with the logarithm. If you're unfamiliar with logarithms, that's okay. We can understand its behavior by looking at its graph. I'm also going to put the line y equals x onto the graph for comparison, but let's look at a few scenarios using both of these functions to see how they would fare in our GEMS algorithm. The vertical axis represents the points the users received. The horizontal axis represents the amount of cash the player ends the game with. Let's say a player ended a game with 100 cash. If we look at the two graphs, we can compare their outcomes. So the log of 100 equals 2 and 100 equals 100. The logarithm's output of 2 seems fairly appropriate. Saving 100 cash isn't very impressive, so it only gives the player 2 points. The line y equals x, in comparison, would give us 100 points. This is way too high. Recall from the previous section that a player completing a half-cash chimps game, which is very hard if you've never tried to complete a half-cash chimps game, would give them 26.4 points. So a half-cash chimps game would give you 26.4 points. So getting 100 points from saving 100 cash is not good. It's way too much. Using the logarithm avoids the issue of making money matter too much by pulling the score down significantly. Let's go to the extreme. Let's say a player ended a game with 1 million cash. This is a much harder challenge as it requires the end user to know how to farm well. 1 million cash would give them the following scores. So the log of 1 million equals 6. And 1 million equals 1 million. We obviously don't want to give a player 1 million points. This puts far too much emphasis on farming, and it would completely invalidate game modes like chimps, half cash, or primary monkeys only, where farming is impossible or significantly reduced. So if you ever wanted to go for a high score on a chimps game or a half cash game, which are probably the game modes that should be giving the high scores, you would get an extremely low score, and we don't want that. A logarithm allows players to use farming strategies to make more points without invalidating the genuine skill of beating a game without farming. Farming strategies often have a property of exponential growth, something the community refers to as snowballing. I'm not going to get into it too much because I don't want to dig into the math more than I am, but logarithms usually work hand in hand with exponential growth. To reiterate, without the logarithm, end of game cash would have way too much sway over the end score of the challenge. Using a logarithm also helps to deal with balancing farming strategies. Farming can cause these end of game numbers to be really huge, and the logarithm keeps the score from blowing up too much. While logarithms can be very useful, they also have a few drawbacks. One drawback occurs when the player ends the game with very little cash, so we would actually set the minimum value of E to be 1. Another downside of using logarithms is that they're very powerful at making large numbers shrink considerably. Like, they're a little too good. Remember our examples from before? The log of 100 equals 2, and the log of 1 million equals 6? The second amount of cash is 10,000 times greater than the first, but it's only got 4 more points. That seems incongruous. The person with 1 million cash should get way more than 4 extra points, because it's significantly harder to do. Well, that's why we square the function here. Now we have the equation E of cash equals the log of cash squared. Let's look at the new scores. That looks a little better. 4 and 36 are really quite different. However, 36 still seems a bit high. Recall the half cash chimps game again? That game was worth 26.4 points. Making 1 million cash isn't significantly harder than that most times. We tend to make multiple millions of cash in boss events. This is why I introduced the final step of the function, dividing the score by 2. Say 2 players beat the same game. One finished with 100 cash left, the other finished with 1 million cash left. With this final function, we say that we get these scores, so 2 and 18. I don't know about you, but those scores just kind of feel intuitive. In short, we built E this way to cover a large potential range of ending cash while also keeping the final score in the range of approximately 1 to 20. Keeping it at this range allows us to weigh it similarly to both the map difficulty score and the game mode score. If you've made it this far, congratulations, because this is a big point of the video. We have G, E, and M. We have all of our components to finish the puzzle out. You are officially both a math nerd and a BTD6 nerd, because now we can put it all together. I considered a handful of ways to combine these 3 scores. You can see them here, but ultimately I remembered to keep it simple, stupid. So here's what I landed on. Gems equals your game mode score plus your end of game cash score plus your map difficulty score squared. Put more simply, gems equals G plus E plus M squared. Why add them? Well, it's very simple and it works. Why square them? Squaring will give extra value to each additional point that you receive. Sometimes getting that extra point can add a lot of extra difficulty to the challenge, and that should be rewarded. Plus, it makes the numbers bigger and number go up good. But just to see it working, let's put it all together with some examples. Say we beat Chimps on Infernal with 50,000 cash left at the end of the game. Our game mode score is 6 times 2, which equals 12. That's 6 base points for that being on a hard base difficulty, and a 2x multiplier for beating that game on Chimps. Our end of game cash score is the log of 50,000 squared divided by 2, which is 11.04 approximately. And finally, our map difficulty score equals 10 for being on the expert map Infernal. Putting it all together, we have 12 plus 11.04 plus 10 squared equals 33.04 squared, which is 1115.56. That's their gem score. Let's alter this example slightly. Say we did the same run, but we ended up black bordering this Infernal game. In this scenario, our game mode score changes in the following way. Our game mode score now equals 2.5 times 6 instead of just being 2 times 6. So our game mode score increases from 12 to 15. Putting this all together into one gem score, we have 15, which is our game mode score, 11.04, which didn't change because we're saving up the same amount of money, plus 10, which didn't change because we're on the same map. Square that all to give us a final score of 1298.89, which reflects the higher difficulty of the black border. Let's do a completely different example now. Say we did a regular impoppable game on Monkey Meadow, and at the end of the game we had $1,000 left. Our game mode score is 10 times 1, 10 points because the base difficulty is impoppable, and a 1x multiplier because we had no add-ons. Our end of game cash score is the log of 1,000 squared divided by 2, or 4.5. And finally, our map difficulty score is 1 for being on the beginner map Monkey Meadow. Putting it all together, we have a gems score of 10 plus 4.5 plus 1 squared, or 240.25. This score is significantly lower than the last one because Monkey Meadow Impoppable is not really that hard. Let's now say that we're doing some insane top-tier farming strats and save 20 million cash by the end of the game. I don't know if this is actually possible, by the way, just a guess for the upper limit, but our end of game cash score would be the log of 20 million squared divided by 2, which gives us 26.65. Putting it all together, we have gems equal to 10 plus 26.65 plus 1, which gives us 1417.52. If we compare this to the Infernal example, this says that saving $2 million on Monkey Meadow Impoppable is approximately as hard as doing a black border chimps on an expert map with 50,000 cash to spare. That seems appropriate to me. What do you think? But let's really put this system to the test, though, in the final example. Let's look at Derp Skull's Chimps Run on Triangle Cave, one of the hardest maps in BTD6 right now. Let's say that this map has a map difficulty score of 20 since it's incredibly hard. The game mode score would be equal to 12 since it was a normal Chimps Run, and he beat the run with $5,149. This gives us a final gem score for him of 1,512.43, a really, really impressive score. So, I want to hear what you think about this. I believe the scoring system allows us to accurately describe a wide variety of games in BTD6 and score them accordingly. It's my hope that the scoring system can be used to help us rank the difficulty and skill of beating certain single-player games, while also considering the complicated nature of the game that we all know and love. I would love to hear your thoughts on all this. Like I said, some of the exact values, like the M values for each map, or the add-on multipliers, could use some community input. What do you like best about the gem system? What do you think could use improvement? I would love, love, love to hear from you. Well, whoever, whenever, and wherever you are on this big internet, I hope you have a nice day.